Sometimes in life, we feel lost. Perhaps we're at a crossroads, or maybe it seems as though we've wandered off the path entirely. Whatever the case, trying to navigate a time like this is no easy task. It can lead us to question our identity and where we belong in the world. It's during these seasons of doubt that we have to look within, reminding ourselves who we are and who we want to be. When I find myself in a season like this, I often revisit the episode of Avatar, Zuko Alone, as I find it to be a comforting study of the self and what it means to find a path that's meant for you. As the name suggests, the episode follows Zuko, who is, big surprise, alone. Up until this point, he had been traveling with his uncle as a banished prince on a fruitless mission to find and capture the Avatar, thus restoring his honor and allowing him to be welcomed home. The two of them had been through many struggles, even shedding their identities to blend into the Earth Kingdom due to the Fire Nation now wanting them captured. And at a certain point, Zuko had decided that enough was enough, opting to separate from his uncle and find a way of his own. The episode starts off with Zuko riding through a desolate landscape, and it's clear to see that he's not looking too good. His stomach's growling and he's feeling desperate for food. But as he spots someone to steal food from, he decides against it after noticing that the woman is pregnant. Up to this point, the show has made it abundantly clear that Zuko is rooted in good, but circumstances in his life have made him angry, bitter, and confused. So, this episode's gonna highlight that dichotomy. He makes it to a town where he stops to buy some food, only to realize he doesn't have enough money. This is a far cry from his upbringing, as Zuko grew up in a palace with servants and plenty of food to eat. He's starting to experience a whole new kind of life, and as he opts to get 2 bags of feed, he spots 2 boys up to no good, throwing eggs at some Earth Kingdom soldiers. They think Zuko is behind the attack, and instead of ratting the kids out, he takes the blame. The tension settles, but not without Zuko having made some enemies in the process. However, this act of kindness does not go unnoticed, as one of the kids, a boy by the name of Lee, starts talking to Zuko. He appreciates him protecting them and wants to make it up to him. They go back to the boys' farm, where Zuko is welcomed like family. I also want to give a quick shout out to the dad of this family, Gonzu, because, oh my gosh, there are multiple times where Zuko is asked about personal details of his life, and Gonzu immediately shuts it down, saying that he doesn't have to say it if he doesn't want to. I specifically want to highlight the moment where Lee asks Zuko how he got his scar, only for Gonzu to say,
"It's not nice to bother people about things they might not want to talk about. A man's past is his business."
I love this line because I feel like on a fundamental level, everyone knows this. But on the other hand, society at times feels more hyperfixated on a person's past than on what they're currently doing for the world in the present. So go Gonzu, right? Freaking epic. Anyway, Zuko's time at this farm is interlaced with moments of his past, and it's cool to see how these work hand in hand. Like, in the flashbacks we see how Zuko's upbringing bred this conflicted mindset that he has. Being around his dad and Azula made him think something crazy like throwing rocks at turtle ducks was okay, but having his sweet and nurturing mother Ursa around allowed him to stay grounded. She was constantly that voice of reason in the midst of all the evil and chaos. After all, Zuko was growing up in a nation that had committed genocide and was planning to do even more evil things. Trying to stay level-headed in an environment like that definitely requires a level-headed role model. Zuko had this goodness in him, this fire in his heart, no pun intended. But as much as his mother loved him, his father only ever saw him as a disappointment, even quoting him saying,
"You're like my sister. My father says she was born lucky. He says I was lucky to be born."
Like, what the heck, man? How can you not grow up with self-doubt when that's in your head 24/7? We even see this play out real time, with Azula being labeled a prodigy and Zuko being dismissed as a failure. And even in the midst of all this shame, who was there to comfort him? His mother. It's lovely how these themes parallel a scene at the farm. Lee borrows Zuko's swords without asking, and when he's caught with them, Zuko shows him how they work. He insists that the reason the boy's struggling with them is that he's using them as 2 separate weapons. But they're not. They're 2 halves of the same whole. Putting too much focus into one over the other will only make things worse. It's so fitting that the creators would make this Zuko's primary weapon because it's so analogous to his life. Zuko is a person who wants to spread good, but his past is full of pain, confusion, and shame. So he does all these terrible things in hopes of making the toxic things in his life better. When he does good, it takes steps away from his home and honor. But when he does bad, it's only feeding into the evil that he was raised around, the evil that he doesn't truly identify with. Zuko's stay finally ends at the farm, but before he leaves, it's learned that Lee's brother was captured by the Fire Nation, which prompts Gonzu to journey to the front lines in hopes of finding him. This leaves Lee with his mom, asking Zuko if he can stay with them. Even though he has to move on, he leaves the boy with a gift, a blade, given to him by Uncle Iroh with the inscription, "Never give up without a fight." However, this farewell is short-lived because not long after his departure, Lee's mother tracks Zuko down, saying that Lee had drawn that very knife at the corrupt Earth Kingdom soldiers and was now being forced to join the army. This leads to an intense showdown. When the soldiers ask Zuko who he is, he says who he is doesn't matter, but he's got them all figured out. They're not soldiers and war heroes, they're just a bunch of bullies using their power to take advantage of good, honest people. And Zuko knows these types of people all too well. They mirror the side of himself that he's been fighting for the entirety of the series up to this point, which is what makes this fight so powerful. Yet, when the fight reaches its head, Zuko thinks back to something his mother said before she disappeared from his life.
Remember this, Zuko. No matter how things may seem to change, never forget who you are.
And it's at this moment that Zuko decides he's tired of hiding, so he shows these thugs who they're really messing with.
My name is Zuko, son of Ursa and Fire Lord Ozai, Prince of the Fire Nation and heir to the throne.
And I'd love to sit here and say this is followed by a miraculous moment of understanding and happiness where Lee's family shows admiration for Zuko being vulnerable about his true identity. But that's not what happens. After pacifying the bullies, he's called out by a man in the crowd, noting that he's no prince, he's an outcast who was burned and discarded by his own father. Zuko then approaches Lee, who is immediately guarded by his mother. All Zuko wants to do is give his gift back to Lee, but neither of them want to hear it, with Lee saying this,
No, I hate you.
This whole scene brings me to tears every time I see it. Not because of what Lee says, but because of what Lee experiences. Before he says this, when Zuko reveals his identity as well as his firebending, Lee's face says everything that he's thinking. He doesn't just have a look of shock. His entire image of the friend he thought he knew was shattered. No longer did he see Zuko as the man that helped him and his family. He saw him as the face of the enemy. Which kind of makes me wonder how this would have played out if Gonzu had been present. I mean, maybe he would have been more understanding, but you never know. Once again, people that Zuko had made a genuine connection with were gone. Similar to his dual swords, he was only living with one side of his life, his good side. But when he brought the other sword in, his complicated side, things didn't go smoothly. Much like Lee couldn't get the two swords to work together in real life, Zuko couldn't get the two sides of his persona to work together in his mind. Zuko still had a lot of work to do after this point until those two halves could make a whole, but he was going to have to find a way of life that could make that happen. And as he rode out of town with the disapproving looks of the people he had befriended, he was left in the same state he was in when the episode started. Alone. Finding your place in the world can be tough. While we all might not have such intense baggage in our lives, there are always so many what-ifs firing off in our brains. We might feel drawn to a certain path, maybe even called to it, but there are so many things that get in the way. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of the past. Whatever that fear might be, you need to find a way forward. This might take a long time, but it will be worth it. Because once you start to make progress, you'll start to see your life flow in a way you never thought possible. Those splintered pieces of your mind working in perfect harmony. Two halves of the same whole. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one.